Okay, we've got that going. That's good. And then let's get in here like that. We are going to make this small over here. Not that small. All right, that's as small as we're going to make it then. Over there. Okay, the recording is on. So, welcome to the September 2023 Grand Canyon Historical Society virtual outing. Hey, are you a member? Because dues are only $35 a year to join the Grand Canyon Historical Society. You can do that online. It's really simple to do. And this is an all-volunteer organization. Nobody's on the payroll here. And it's a lot of work. And if you want to join, boy, you want to help out with anything, well, we really encourage that. As a member, you get the Old Pioneer magazine 4 times a year. And this magazine is full of some amazing history that you just don't find on the internet. It's just amazing stuff. GrandCanyonHistory.org, the Historical Society's website, is a wonderful place to find some very interesting Grand Canyon history, including closing in now on 500 oral histories. Just a lot of fun about Grand Canyon. There's all these virtual outings that are recorded or on the website, and there are a number of recorded events that are there. It's a wonderful resource. And membership, as I mentioned, is only $35 a year. That's all happening at GrandCanyonHistory.org. The virtual outings are a volunteer event that people that have an interesting Grand Canyon story or a regional geographical story of history in the area present. That all happens here. If you have a presentation to give, or you know someone who might be an interesting presenter, send an email to outings@grandcanyonhistory.org and let us know about it. So looking ahead, what's coming up next month? October 10th, 2023, Nancy Malidi Meekum is going to be presenting the Quaternary Fauna of Grand Canyon. So in this history here, we are going to be going way back into the Quaternary, the last 100 to 200,000 years, and looking at the ecology of the Grand Canyon at that time. That's next month, the second Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock, Flagstaff, Arizona time. Today, Jerry Cannon is going to, Jerry Snow. I get Jerry Cannon and Jerry Snow confused here. Jerry Snow is going to present for us Carl Gorman, Philip Johnston, and the Navajo Code Talkers. So typically what I do here is I read a biography now of Jerry and introduce Jerry. But today is a little different because Jerry is here with me at the house, at my house here in Flagstaff. So I'm going to ask Jerry to introduce himself and give us a small bio about himself, and then begin his presentation. Before I do that, though, I am going to stop my share for a minute, and then I'm going to start it again with Jerry's PowerPoint presentation.
Unmute.
So that Jerry is going to be spooled up here. And we've got
I
Jerry's
did, yeah.
spooled up. And
Right.
Karen, I'm going to mute you.
Sorry.
That's good. All right, here we go. You're going to pull this chair over, Jerry. Okay. And you're going to sit right there.
Shorter than you.
It's all right. I just
All
want to
right.
get you in the camera.
Yeah, you're there.
Excellent.
All right.
Can you,
Good
Jerry,
evening.
Can you give us a little bio?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I probably start. What I say about my education is that I was a professional student for many years with too many degrees, but which included plant ecology, environmental health, etc. But so I first worked for Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Taught full time for about 8 years, I believe. And then I went back to school again, and etc. And worked for Monterey County Water Resources Agency in Monterey, California, as a water quality specialist. And then I moved to Arizona, and I worked for the Rocky Mountain Research Station, U.S. Forest Service, for a while, and then as a tour guide for what is now known as ROAD, Road Scholars, and kind of became a local historian, done research on local people from the 19th century. And so brings me up to the code talkers.
Excellent, Jerry. I'm going to just step in for a minute and ask you if we can have your permission to record your talk tonight.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.
All right. So let's move on. So we're going to start out here with Carl Gorman. There he is, about 1.5 years of age, sitting on his mom's right knee. That's on the left side, of course. His sister is next to him, and his mother is Alice Peshlikai Gorman. She married Nelson Gorman, and they're all dressed in white. They look pretty fancy right there. The Gormans had a ranch near anyway, on the Navajo reservation, and she was a weaver and a homemaker. And I just have to tell one story about that family. There was a salesman that came around, and he was trying to get rid of his records, which were all what do you call them? Opera from the early 1900s. And I don't think they'd ever heard opera before, but they said, okay, we'll buy some opera records. So she then, when she was weaving, especially in the evening, she would start playing some opera. And of course, her little son, he heard that, along with her tap, 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 as she was doing her weaving on the loom. And he became addicted to opera, as well as the tap, tap, tap of the Navajo rugs being made in the home. So, yeah, so the next picture I have of him is right here in the middle. His cousin, Frank Peshlikai, on the left, his younger brother, Wallace, on the right, and Carl Gorman in the middle. He is 10 years old here in this picture in uniform, because this was the uniform that was being worn in the Rehoboth Indian School just east of Gallup, New Mexico. That was his first year going to school at 10 years of age. He was born in 1907. And He was always pushing the edge. You know, every school has rules, especially boarding schools. And one of the rules is you don't speak your native language, you speak English only. Well, he got in trouble several times. He was banished to the basement with whatever. And he got fed up with the rules. And so in the middle of winter, I think it was in February, he decided he was leaving school. And he told his cousin and his brother what he was doing. And they said, "Oh, we have to go with you." And so here's the three musketeers. They set out to go north, about a 3 days hike home to near Chinle, Arizona, on the Navajo reservation. Well, they had rough weather and managed to find a hogan here and there to stay overnight. Finally arrived home. Their parents were very surprised, of course. And so the other two boys were sent back to school. Carl said he refused to go back. Well, his father knew a teacher who taught at the Albuquerque Indian School. And so he talked to this teacher that he knew, and Carl went to school the next year at Albuquerque Indian School, which he finally graduated from, amazingly. But when he got his diploma, he was walking across the campus looking at his diploma, and it says certificate in farming. He says, "What? I've studied English and history and math and all this stuff, and they give me a certificate in farming?" So he tore it up, threw it on the ground, and swore that he would never go back to school again. Well, because he was proficient in English and Navajo, he was hired by the Soil Conservation Service to work on the reservation doing restoration problems related to soil erosion, etc. Here he is a few years later, very handsome dude. And like I said, he was working for the Soil Conservation Service. Well, you know what happened in December the 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And all these Navajos were working for the Soil Conservation Service, got pink slips. But he noticed that all the white guys who were working for the service still had employment. So he was out of work. He had a family. And so he was listening to the shortwave radio one night and heard this ad come over from the tribal chairman on the radio, and it said, the U.S. Marine Corps are looking for some good men, and they're especially looking for some Navajos that speak English and Navajo. And you can go to the recruitment station and sign up. So that's exactly what he did with some buddies. And what's my next picture here? Yeah, there we go. So here's the sign-up station. What's coming back here?
You keep going.
Oh, okay. So this is the recruitment station. After Pearl Harbor, you can't see the long line of Navajos lined up with their rifles and everything else, waiting to sign up. And so they signed up, and they were gathered together. Next picture. Oh, back here. Okay. So these guys signed up, were bused over to San Diego, to the naval base, where they were underwent their basic training. So now we're going to switch to the other character I'm going to talk about, and here he is, 4 years old, Philip Johnston, with his parents, Maggie, and his father, William Riley Johnston. They came to the Navajo reservation because they were sponsored by the Kansas City YMCA. And and at first Methodist church also, but that didn't work out. So here they are just before they left Kansas City on the train. They disembarked and on the Navajo reservation and went up to the Hopi reservation, where there was a Mennonite missionary, and talked to him about their prospects here. And the missionary told him, well, why don't you go to the village of Moonkopi, or Moenkopi as we call it in English, Hopi village. And he says, I know the lady who's the village chief there, and talk to her. So that's where they went. And that was about a 30-mile wagon road ride. They arrived there, and the lady, the tribal chairman, or the village chief, I should say, she told them that there was a building that they could use, but it had been used for keeping sheep out of the weather. So it had a rather unique floor that kind of smelled like sheep dung. And it was a red brick house. And so she said, well, you can have that if you want to clean it up. So that's what they did. And so William Riley Johnston became known as Hosteen Kinlachii, which means Mr. Red House Man, because he lived in this red brick house. And his son, Philip, his name became Kinlachii Begay. That means son of Red House Man. So they established a little mission operation there. But there was an incident that took place just east of Flagstaff, outside of the Navajo reservation. There was a hunting party of Navajos, about 5 Navajos, who had killed a deer and had starting their campfire, roasting the deer. And all of a sudden, 4 white guys rode up on horseback, got off their horses, walked into their camp and read something on a piece of paper, and went to go try to grab their hunting rifles away from these Navajos. And they thought they were stealing them. Unbeknownst to the Navajo, this was a sheriff's posse looking for some Navajos who had roughed up a cowboy, claiming that the cowboy had stolen one of their horses. So a fight breaks out. Pretty soon gunfire takes place, and when the dust finally cleared, there were one of the posse members was dead. 2 Navajos were dead. Remember, there were 5 of them, and 2 more were wounded. And one of the wounded is in this picture with his horse, and that is Bewoatini, Hosteen Bewoatini, which Navajos have kind of nicknames. That Navajo word means Mr. Tooth Missing, because he had a tooth missing. So the posse members managed to get back to Flagstaff, Arizona, and reported the incident. And the Navajos finally got back to their reservation. This was in 1899, just before the turn of the 20th century. So long story short, the 3 surviving Navajos were, by the grand jury, were accused of murder, killing a posse member. And so this is the newspaper of the time, November 18, 1899. The Coconino Sun, fight with Navajos. Officers make a brave stand against odds of 2 to 1. On November 6th, a party of Navajo Indians assaulted William Montgomery, a cowboy, an employee of William Roden. They held him up at gunpoint and otherwise abused him, accusing him of stealing their ponies. After maltreating him to their satisfaction, they permitted him to go. He came to Flagstaff, obtained a warrant for the arrest of the Navajos, etc. These conflicts this was the worst conflict ever fought in the Southwest. 8 Indians, so there were only 5, was the opposing force. But the white man made a stand that will go down in the history of Coconino County as heroic. Well, this is a very biased report. It's not exactly what happened. So William Johnston happened to be riding from the village of Moenkopi down to Flagstaff. Some Navajos saw him and encouraged him to come with them to a hogan. And when they got there, he noticed that when they went into the hogan, there was a gentleman that he knew lying on a bloody sheepskin in the hogan. And they told him the story that I just told you. And Johnston said, okay, let's not do anything. There were a huge gathering of Navajos around this hogan, some of them with guns and rifles. And he said, well, don't do anything. Let me go into Flagstaff and find out what's going on. So he went into Flagstaff and found out what they said in Flagstaff. And he said, okay, he was assured from the sheriff that these Navajos, if they were accused of anything, would get a fair trial. So he went back to the Navajos and talked to them all night long, and they agreed to surrender, the parties involved, to if they were arrested. So that's the way things were left. And the grand jury met the next early, let's see, is there a date on here? Yeah, April 8, 1900. So they were indicted for murder. Hosteen Bewa'atani, John Doe, and Richard Rowe, Navajo Indians whose names are not known to the grand jury. Later, they found out their names and they wrote them in on the right side. The indictment was murder. And here's what the indictment says. Let's see. John Doe, Hosteen Bewa'atani, John Doe, Richard Rowe, Indians whose true names are not known to the grand jury, did willfully, unlawfully, feloniously, deliberately, premeditatedly, of their own malice and forethought, shoot off at, towards, and against, and strike said Montgomery with certain laden bullets, inflicting in the body of Montgomery a mortal wound, of which said mortal wound Montgomery then and there instantly died. Wow, talk about legalese. Whew. Well, the trial was set for September of 1900. So the jury was chosen for the trial, and they met for 3 days, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And the last day of the trial, Bewa'atani hadn't shown up yet. He had actually been advised by William Riley Johnston to go to his relatives up on a long distance away, about 90 miles away. And he agreed that if anything he was supposed to go to court, that they would let him know and he would go. And that's what happened. But he didn't get there until the last day of the trial. So when he came into the courtroom, it was getting close to noon, and they were about getting ready to go to lunch. And he walked down to the front of the bench, and the judge says, why are you here, and what's your name? Said, my name is Hosteen Bewa'atani, and I'm here to keep my word. That was what he said through a translator. So the judge turned him over to the sheriff and said, we'll take a break for lunch. So after lunch, they came back, the final arguments were made, and the jury went to deliberate probably about maybe 3 hours. They came back with acquittal for the Navajos. The main argument was self-defense. So there was rejoicing in Navajo land. So this is the courthouse, still there today, the county courthouse. Took place on the 2nd floor, just next to the clock tower. And on the back there, on the on the right side is the jail, the county jail. That's where the Navajos were kept until their trial. Of course, they were released to go back to their homes. But the Indian Rights Association had been contacted by William Riley Johnston, and they hired an attorney to help defend the Navajos. And so Johnston reported by telegraph to the Indian Rights Association in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the outcome, and thanked them for supplying the attorney to defend the Navajos. But he says, we've got the same problem. We've got Texas cowboys that are running these Navajos off of their traditional land and supposedly, disrupting their livelihoods, stealing their horses. Sometimes that went both ways. But anyway, so the Indian Rights Association, Johnston asked the Indian Rights Association, well, what should I do now? They said, prepare a map and show where all these Navajos live, and ask them how many generations they've been living on the land. So that's what he did. He took 6 months doing this, telegraphed the Indian Rights Association, told them he had his map and data done, and was ready to report back. They said, well, get on the train and come to Washington, D.C., and we'll set up an appointment for you. So that's what they did. So Johnston took his son, Philip, who was about 9 years old and spoke much better Navajo than he did because his only playmates were mostly Navajo kids, and bring 2 Navajos with you. And when they got back to Washington, D.C., there was a new president because McKinley had been assassinated. And his vice president was now president, and that president was Theodore Roosevelt. So they found out their appointment was with the president of the United States. So they were sitting in the waiting room, and the president's secretary came out and told the audience waiting for their turn that they would have to see him and reschedule their appointment because the president had urgent business to take care of because he'd only been in office for 2 weeks. So immediately Johnston stood up and said, Mr. Secretary, we've come 2,000 miles from the territory of Arizona, and I brought these 2 Navajos with me, and we don't have much funds to stay here very long. What should we do? And the secretary said, well, just sit down. So they sat down, and the secretary disappeared. Pretty soon he came back and said, the president will see you now. So they're ushered into Roosevelt's office, and Johnston asked the 2 Navajos to explain to the president why they were there. Well, of course, Roosevelt didn't speak Navajo, but Philip did. So Philip translated for the Navajos for Theodore Roosevelt. And after they said what they said, Johnston rolled out his map on the president's desk, showing where all these Navajos lived and how many generations they were living there. And the president said, I'd like to keep the map and turn this over to the Indian Rights Association, or to them. And so that's what happened, and they were dismissed and went back to their homes in Arizona Territory. So a few weeks later, there was a telegram from the Indian Rights Association saying the president had signed an executive order setting aside all that land for the Navajos. This is Philip Johnston on the right, his little brother Philip, and that's William Riley Johnston. This is a couple years later. Theodore Roosevelt, of course. And this is the executive order signed by Theodore Roosevelt on November 14, 1901. And basically it has the land description, and then it says this land is hereby withdrawn from sale and settlement until such time as the Indians residing then shall be settled permanently under the provisions of the Homestead Law or the General Allotment Act approved in 1887, and an act amendatory therefore approved in 1891, etc. So the Navajos got their land. That's known today as the loop extension to the Navajo reservation. Let's see, where am I pushing the wrong button here? So that land, here's the Navajo reservation on the outside outline, including the yellow spaces. That's the gray area is the existing reservation in 1899. The B section on the lower left is the loop extension to the Navajo reservation. The A area had also been set aside by McKinley, and the J, and E sections were also added to the Navajo reservation because of the work of William Riley Johnston. This is the view of where they lived on their home in on the loop extension to the Navajo reservation on the Little Colorado River. This is where Philip would take the family cow out to pasture with the with the San Francisco peaks in the background, highest mountain in Arizona. This is a Christmas party on the Navajo reservation in 1935. Philip Johnston's on the left. His wife Bernice is number 6. This is at Wupopki National Monument. The director is number 2, and his wife is number 6. And Peshlikayat City, another Navajo elder who was well known to the Johnstons, is number 3 in the picture, and his son is number 4. Christmas party. So the Navajos passed their 1942. They passed with flying colors their basic training, and this is their graduation picture with 3 officers sitting in the front seat, white guys. Now, Carl Gorman, if you look at the back row, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the right side, that's Carl Gorman. He lied about his age. He was too old to be enlisted, but he gave his age as being able to be enlisted. And so then they were given their assignment. Their assignment was to develop a code in their language for communications. So they were assigned to the Communication Corps. And after this, they were working on developing a code in their own language. So I'm just briefly going to go over the basic part of the code. First, they were told to develop an alphabet. So words that they didn't have a code for could be spelled out. So for example, for the letter A, English word ant, in Navajo it's wolachi. B, bear, for in Navajo, sosh. For C, for mousy, cat. D, for deer, for bat, etc. down the line. Glizzy, for goat, etc. So that's how they developed this. But when they consulted with code people, they said, well, you need more than one word for each letter because that's how you break a code, is looking for repetition. So later they had to add about 3 letters for 3 words for each letter of the alphabet in Navajo. So technical terms like bombs and grenades and mortars and torpedoes, etc. This is how they did it. Bombs were eggs in Navajo, grenades were potatoes in Navajo, etc. And let's see, for example, a fighter plane was a hummingbird in Navajo, a dive bomber was a chicken hawk, etc. So this is the couple of Toledo last name boys. They were cousins. And this is working with a radio, transmitting and receiving messages in Navajo, practicing before they were shipped to the field. of operation. These are more recruits being sworn in. This is at Fort Wingate, also a Navajo school near Gallup. Gallup, New Mexico. So they arrived at Camp Pendleton, not Camp Pendleton. This was the Marine base in San Diego. Camp Pendleton was just being established at that time on the Pacific coast, a little further north. This is the housing for the Navajos. Became known as Tokyo City because the guys that lived in it looked like Japanese, the Navajos. Here's 4 Navajos practicing the Marine Corps hymn in Navajo, done by the guy second from the left, Jimmy King, who wrote the words for the Navajo hymn in Navajo. I love that car in the background there. Now, so what's Philip Johnston doing? Well, after he went to engineering school, he was hired by the city of Los Angeles to be an engineer. World War II comes along. He's reading about the Japanese breaking our codes in the Pacific. And he served in World War I, where there were some Indians that were using their language for messaging in Europe. And so he wrote a letter to the Marine Corps and suggested that maybe if they developed a code within the Navajo language, the Japanese would never figure it out. So after some experiments and demonstrations of how that might work, the Marines said, okay. They wanted 300 guys to be recruited for this. Well, that didn't go over in Washington very well. They said, well, a platoon of 30 guys is plenty to have a pilot program to see how this might work. So that's how they started out. They recruited actually 29 guys. Well, there were 29 that stayed in the program that passed their, I showed you their graduation picture. These are the guys that developed the code. The original code had about 200 words besides the alphabet, more technical words that could be used in communication. Later, they added more and more words, so eventually the code had over 400 code words, not counting the alphabet, which were 3 code words for each letter of the alphabet. So they moved to Camp Pendleton. This is the new barracks at Camp Pendleton. These are Navajos living in the barracks, doing training and learning the code. Philip Johnston's kind of right in the middle at the end of that first row there on the right side. These are guys that were kept back after the others were trained and went into the field. I'll just mention guy on the left. I'll remember his name in a minute. Okay, and these were training the new recruits in the code after they went through their basic training. That's Philip Johnston there and Manuelito, that's his name, right there. Philip Johnston talking to Johnny Manuelito, and that's at the code school. Philip Johnston was the administrator of the code school. He did not teach code. He did not develop the code. This is night training. Lloyd Oliver is one of the instructors instructing some new recruits in night operations. In June of 1943, Arizona Highways published an article about the Navajo Indian at war. And this could have been a disastrous article. I just want to read a paragraph. This is a top secret program, the Navajo Code program. This is a quote from the article. The U.S. Marine Corps has organized a special Navajo signal unit for combat communication service. A platoon of 30 Navajos were recruited in the spring of 1942. Its members were trained in signal work using the Navajo language as a code, adapting a scheme tried with considerable success during World War I, when the enemy was completely baffled by employment of an Indian language in front line communications. The 30 Navajo Marines performed their duties so successfully that the plan was expanded. Recruiting details went back to the Navajo reservation in early autumn, and by early December, 67 new boys were enlisted. Two members of the original detachment went back as corporals to assist in explaining the work to the eligible Indians. Well, the only comment I want to make on that is, fortunately, there weren't any Japanese who subscribed to the Arizona highways. So the original 29 guys went out to the battle going on in 1942, which was Guadalcanal at the bottom of the map there. And then they moved to the Solomon Islands, and then to Tarawa, to the Marshalls, to Guam, to Saipan, the Marianas, Iwo Jima, and finally in 1945, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Now, one of the problems is, as I briefly mentioned before, the wise guys who didn't know that Navajos looked like similar to Japanese, was that these code talkers are wearing, of course, Marine uniforms, but to untrained American soldiers, they looked like Japanese. And the Japanese were very skillful at night in finding uniforms, American uniforms, and putting those on and making raids at night. And so the problem was, and then if they didn't know that these guys were on their side and code talkers, they were sometimes at gunpoint taken to headquarters under arrest. So as though they were Japanese. So what they did was assigned soldiers, non-Navajo soldiers, to protect the code talkers. So this is from a children's book, and that's what's happening here. There's a soldier that doesn't know this code talker here is on their side, and so the guard for the code talker is interrupting that event. These are actually code talkers in the field at the island of Bougainvillea, and George Kirk is the code talker on the right, and Henry Bahi on the left. You can see their equipment with a gun handy in case needed. This is the Marshall Islands. I was privileged to do some work on the Marshall Islands in 1980, and we were, well, I won't say what we were doing there, but anyway, some important work. And so I got to see things like these beautiful lagoons with the palm trees, and did some snorkeling and so forth besides the work I was doing. And that's a Japanese fortification on one of the Marshall Islands. Walls 3 feet thick. Japanese were in the Marshall Islands. They had colonized the Marshall Islands after World War I. These are some Marshallese kids with a couple of American kids. That's me over 40 years ago on the tarmac at one of the Marshall Islands. Back to Saipan in this case. This is Carl Gorman. Of course, he went out with the original 29 to Guadalcanal. By now, they had taken Guadalcanal and moved up to the Marianas, including Saipan. So he's in a observation station here on the island of Saipan. Now, when he was in Guadalcanal, he contracted malaria. And so he would have malarial outbreaks every once in a while. And then while he was in Saipan, he got shell shocked by an explosion from an artillery shell that was nearby. He was not wounded, but he was delirious and he was unconscious. And he then was shipped to and had an outbreak of malaria as well. So he was shipped to a hospital in Hawaiian Islands. And he came to there in a hospital bed covered in white sheets and white walls and the white nurses wearing white gowns. And when he woke up, he told the doctor that came in, he says, did I get killed and wind up in heaven? He couldn't believe where he was. And he got acquainted with his doctor quite well. And so he recovered and wasn't sent back to, it was getting near the end of the war by then. But the doctor one day asked him, well, what would you like to do once the war's over? He says, well, I have no idea. I never thought about it. He says, well, what do you like to do? He says, I like to draw. Now, to go back to his childhood a little bit, he would, anytime he was sent out to do the chores at the farm where he grew up with his dad and mom and brother and sister and so forth, he would always take a paper bag, like a grocery bag, and a pencil. And sometimes he was caught not doing his chores, but he was sitting in the corral drawing horses. That was his favorite image that he liked to draw, were horses. So anyway, he told the doctor, he says, well, you know what I like to do is I like to draw. I like to do art. And the doctor says, well, you know, you can get the GI Bill and you could go to art school. So when the war was over, that's what he did. He signed up and took classes starting at the Otis Institute for Art in Southern California. Okay, back to World War II. I believe this happened on Saipan. Just let me grab my notes here. This is Sammy Holiday, another code talker. You can see the Marine emblem on his hat there. He was in a foxhole on Saipan with the 4th Marine Division. And this is what he said. A week after landing on the shores of Saipan during World War II, a fellow Navajo code talker and I were in a prone position discussing the fact that we didn't have a chance if we moved. Now, his fellow code talker turned out to be Dan Aki, which I'll show you a picture of him later. I put my helmet on my rifle and raised it up out of the foxhole, and shots sprayed across our position, mostly from our right. The Army had taken the right flank. It was the first time these soldiers had been where actual fighting was going on, and they were shooting at anything and everything. The Japanese were on our left, however, and the possibility of being shot by them was also very real. We stayed down in our foxhole waiting. Shouts and screams of fellow soldiers were all around us, and we thought these were our last minutes on earth. Suddenly, I heard a deep thump next to me, where my fellow code talker was lying, and I was scared I would be next. It took every ounce of courage I had to look over at him, expecting to see blood and guts. To my relief, and the relief of my foxhole partner, I saw one of the biggest bullfrogs I'd ever seen in my partner's back. Well, a little humor along with the war there. So that was in Saipan. So there were 6 Marine divisions in serving in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And they moved on to the Marianas. And by the beginning of 1945, they were planning the invasion of Iwo Jima, which was getting close to Japanese territory. Well, it was actually occupied by Japanese. And they had airfields on Iwo Jima, and they had fighter planes that were flying up and trying to shoot down the B-29s that were flying over on their way to Tokyo or coming back from Tokyo. dropping bombs on Japan. This is the island of Iwo Jima. That's about 10 miles long and about 2 miles wide. You can see the Japanese airfields there, 2 of them. They were actually working on another one a little further to the left. The Mount Suribachi is on the lower end, of extinct volcano. And this next picture are pictures of bombs falling on Iwo Jima as they tried to soften up the Japanese positions. But they saw no Japanese positions. The Japanese, 20,000 Japanese were all dug in caves and tunnels, etc., underground. That's a contemporary picture of the island of Iwo Jima. That's Mount Suribachi in the foreground, and the rest of the island looking 5 miles north and 2 miles across. There were 3 Marine divisions that landed on Iwo Jima in February of 1945. The 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th Marine divisions. That constituted about 60,000 Marines. 20,000 Japanese soldiers dug in underground. Total of about 80,000 soldiers on this little piece of real estate. That's about 2 times 5, about 8 square miles, actually. 8 square miles. 80,000 soldiers. That's the population of Flagstaff today, by the way. So this is a picture on Mount Suribachi as the Marines are trying to take it from the Japanese. And those are supply boats lined up on the beach, the landing beach down below. The 5th Marine Division was assigned to take Mount Suribachi. So that's what's going on right now in the early days of the battle. This is one of the code talkers in, I believe this is 2006. This is Ted Draper on the right. William Yazzie, another Navajo, accompanied him on this expedition to the island of Iwo Jima. Now, every year in the last about 30 years, I believe, they've been having a special ceremony once a year to honor the soldiers that died on this island, both Japanese and American. And I'll get back to that. But Ted Draper sent the message from the top of Mount Suribachi when they raised the American flag to headquarters. That's a earlier picture of Ted Draper at his, that's in Canyon de Chelly, the village of Chin Lee, where Ted Draper resided. He's passed away now. This is the message that Ted Draper sent. I'm sure you can all read that very clearly. Let me just give you a translation of that message. So here's what that message says. To 5th Marine Division, info, ADC. ADC is Belasana Be Mosi. That's ADC. From Lieutenant 228th E Company, 3rd Platoon, 1st Lieutenant H.G. Schreier's platoon raised U.S. flag and secured Mount Suribachi at 10:20 a.m. That's what that message says, translated from the Navajo code. And that's a picture that you probably haven't seen, because the usual one that you see is the picture that Rosenthal took of the 5 Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. But I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 6th picture or 7th person from the left to the right is Ted Draper. Another Navajo that I got acquainted with was Paul Blatchford. That's a picture taken of him in about 1980. He was also with the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima. This is a picture taken of him, I believe, in about 2006. He died about 3 months after this picture was taken. But that's me on the right, and my friend John Yazzie, another Navajo who was not a code talker, but served in the Marines. And he does reenactments of the code. He has a radio and all that stuff that the code talkers used. Paul Blatchford. This is at Reardon Mansion. I gave a talk on the code talkers, and they called me up and said, Jerry, you got a code talker that's coming to hear your presentation. I said, who is it? Paul Blatchford and his family. I said, oh, great. I've already talked to him before. I says, I'll be sure to ask him to give us, tell some stories during the, after the program. So that's what he did. He was sharp as a tack, but in very poor health. Like I say, he died about 3 months later. Not working. Whatever. Okay. There we go. Okay, so the flag was raised on 5 days after they landed. They call it D+5. It's 24th of February 1945, and that's the progress they've made. The landing beach is over there on the lower right. The airport they had secured, and now they're continuing to try to take the whole island. But this was a very difficult slog because all the Japanese were underground. This is a B-29 that made an emergency landing because they had one of their engines out and they didn't think they were going to get back to Tinian, where they came from. And so they said they wanted permission to land. They said, well, there's a war going on here, but you can take your chances. So they landed that B-29, got some mechanics on the engine, replaced or did something for the fuel pump. And then those guys took off and they made it back to base. That was the first B-29 to land there. Casualties, very high. This is just the 3rd Division's share of the price of Iwo Jima. This is a crash landed, that's the Mount Suribachi in the background. That's a crash landed B-29. This, I was giving a talk in Apache Junction on the Navajo Code Talkers, and I always ask, we have any veterans from World War II here? I want to thank you for your service. Several guys raised their hand, and I said, well, if you want to talk to me about anything after my program, come up and talk to me after my presentation. Who talked to me after the program was the guy that right in the middle of the back row there. That was Elmer Jackson. He was bombardier and sometimes navigator on the city of Detroit B-29, flying missions from Tinian, I believe, Tinian to Japan. And I said, well, you must have some pictures maybe that you took. He says, I sure do. I says, well, could you make copies and send them to me? And he did. He was a snowbird from Wyoming during the winter. And he sent me pictures, just amazing pictures. I'm going to show you a few. This is one of the pictures. This is at their base, actually, in Guam or Tinian. Now, just to orient you, this is a map that shows the Marianas, the South, Saipan, Tinian, the huge B-29 air base there, Guam to the south, and Iwo Jima is way up here about 1,000 miles away. And we flew. I was privileged to be the World War II Museum in New Orleans was giving tours of battle sites in the Pacific that occurred during World War II. And so I went on that tour, and we were privileged to go to the honoring ceremony for the men that died on both sides at Iwo Jima, an annual event. And so I'll show you some pictures of that as well. We flew a charter plane, several hours in the air to Iwo Jima. It's now a Japanese military base. This is a picture that Jackson took from his B-29. These are P-51 escorts for their B-29. This is the battleship Missouri steaming into Tokyo Harbor for the surrender of the Japanese, which took place on the deck of the battleship Missouri. This is a photo mural on the battleship Missouri. General Douglas MacArthur sitting at the desk. Wainwright just behind him, who was with the corregidor and the soldiers that took the death march, although he was evacuated from Japan. I mean, not Japan, from the Philippines. A Japanese general over on the right, and a couple of Japanese foreign ministers that are going to sign the documents. We also had on that tour in the battle sites of the Pacific. That's, of course, the Arizona Memorial, Battleship Arizona, and that's the Battleship Missouri, which we got a tour on. Show you that's where that photo mural of the signing of the surrender. This is an actual oil painting in a museum there, just very realistic. That might be that torpedo going toward that battleship there, but actually there was a bomb that was dropped on the battleship Arizona that exploded, and that's why it sunk in place. That's the anchor there in Pearl Harbor of the battleship Arizona. We did a tour in the harbor there, and I bought this hat for the USS Arizona. That's on the Arizona, one of the forward guns. That's one of the shells. You can see a person over there in the background for size. They could shoot that pretty accurately for 20 to 25 miles. We had with our group, we had 5 World War II veterans, all served in the Pacific. This is on Saipan. That's one of the cliffs that some of the people were jumping off of to commit suicide because they didn't want to be captured by the Americans. That's what the Japanese told them. They would be tortured. It's better to commit suicide. And along the waterfront or the ocean front there in Saipan is this beautiful monuments, peace monuments. This is one in Japanese. And a poem that's also there, written by a Japanese emperor. A peace pole in 4 languages on each side of the pole. Guam, I thought that was a pretty license plate. Pacific War Museum. The only place I encountered anything about the Navajo code talkers, not even our expert historians who talked to us about the various places we were at and the battles and so forth, never was the code talkers mentioned except in this museum. And that's it right there, the legacy of the code talkers. Little museum humor. Complaint department, take a number. This was our chartered United Airlines plane that we flew to Iwo Jima on. The Marine, they flew out of Okinawa on that plane over to the left. And so there's this stone that's written in Japanese on the other side and in English on this side. On the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, American and Japanese veterans met again on these same sands, this time in peace and friendship. We commemorate our comrades, living and dead, who fought here with bravery and honor. We pray together that our sacrifice on Iwo Jima will always be remembered and never be repeated. That was in February 1985. 3rd, 4th, 5th Division of the U.S. Marine Corps. That's a wreath. We've placed wreaths there as part of the ceremony. That's the Americans' wreaths. That's the Japanese side with the Japanese message and the wreaths that the Japanese placed during the ceremony. We had a program which had translations of what the Japanese were saying at this ceremony, except for this gentleman right here. This is the grandson of General Kurabayashi, who was the Japanese general at Iwo Jima during World War II. That's his grandson. And unfortunately, his talk was not translated, but I would die to hear what he had to say. This is one of the pillboxes on Iwo Jima, slowly being eroded away. You can see the reinforced concrete there. We were all dressed up too. They told us to dress somewhat formally, shirt and tie, you know. So that's how we dressed when we went to Iwo Jima for the ceremony. I met Carl Gorman in 1995 when I first moved here. His bust was being unveiled on the North Campus of Northern Arizona University at the time. And this is a picture that he did of Code Talkers, who was on the cover of the program. And he signed it for me. He's in the, well, this is his bust just being unveiled right there in 1995 on the North Campus. And he's sitting in a wheelchair over here on the right. He died in I believe 1998. Of course, his son is probably better known than he is, R.C. Gorman, famous Navajo artist. This is a portrait that Carl did of his father, Nelson Gorman. And of course, still doing horses. Started as a little boy out doing his chores, drawing horses. This is a watercolor that he did. This is one that I have hanging in my house from the Gorman Gallery in Sedona, Arizona. A charcoal and little pastel color in that one. Always his horses he drew were always in motion. That's hard to draw. Usually you see horses drawn when they're standing still. Okay, 1969, 4th Marine Division reunion in Chicago. This is a picture taken and published in the newspaper. That's Carl Gorman on the left. Sammy Holliday, you already met him in the middle. And that's Philip Johnston on the right. And I didn't know what quite was going on here until I met Carl Gorman's daughter, Zonnie Gorman. And she told me these two guys did their training before Philip Johnston became administrator of the code school. So they didn't even know who he was. So they're kind of laughing at him. Well, how did you get one of these medals? These medals were awarded to all the men, the code talkers that were at this reunion. And so they're laughing and he's looking kind of serious. That's because they're challenging him. How did you get this medal? That's the medal right there, honoring the American Indian Marine, bronze medallion. given to code talkers in June 1969. And basically that's when the code was declassified. And here's Carl Gorman on the left with his daughter Zani, 16 years old at that time. And they're in a parade wearing their official code talker uniforms after they established their association, carrying a banner in a parade. That's Dan Aki with all his medals. This is the first Navajo Code Talkers Association annual convention in 1983. And Carl designed the emblem for their Code Talker Association. Now, this is a Japanese photographer who as a young man, he came to the Navajo reservation because he'd heard about Navajos. He didn't know anything about code talkers. And he was a photographer. And so one day he was thumbing a ride on the Navajo reservation, and Carl pulled up in his pickup and said, "Hop in." So he hopped in, and they introduced themselves, and found out that Carl Gorman was a Navajo code talker during World War II. He didn't have any idea of what that was all about. And so Carl said, "Well, why don't you come to a meeting of our association?" So he did. And he became the official photographer for the Navajo Code Talkers. And later he got hired by the Navajo Times, the Navajo newspaper, and worked for them. Then he met a Navajo lady, and they fell in love. And they had a child. And of course, the parents of the child in Japan had to come and see their new grandson. So here we are at the Window Rock tribal headquarters for the Navajo Nation with Carl Gorman and Kenji Kawano's father, Mr. Kawano, embracing with the picture of the Window Rock in the background. Now, Carl, of course, we know what he did during World War II. Kenji's father had trained to be a torpedo operator, a kamikaze torpedo operator. Fortunately, we didn't invade Japan, so he never had to serve, so he survived the war. So that's it, folks. So a few references here. I would highly recommend this biography of Carl Gorman, Power of a Navajo, 1996. Bernice Johnston, that's Philip Johnston's wife, who wrote a book, Two Ways in the Desert, which has a whole lot of information about Philip himself. Kenji Kawano did a book, Warriors, Navajo Code Talkers. He did a lot of portraits of Navajo Code Talkers. And one of the best books, actually written by a lady, Sally McLean, called The Navajo Weapon, The Navajo Code Talkers, published in 2001. That's the best that describes all the action that the Code Talkers were in on every one of the islands that they had battles. It's very well written. Now I want to introduce you to my friend over here, Mr. G.I. Joe Navajo Code Talker. So here he is. Let's see if we can see him here. Yeah, there he is. G.I. Joe Navajo Code Talker. He's got a radio telephone on his back there. He's got his dog tag up here that says G.I. Joe. And guess what? He speaks Navajo and he translates. So let me have him say a few words to you.
Request their support,
etc. I hope you can hear that. This is a G.I. Joe doll done by Hosper quite a few years ago. They put these out. Any questions?
Yeah, Jerry, I've got some questions. I'll go first.
Okay.
Do you know who it was that came up with the idea to use Navajo with code talking?
That was Philip Johnston.
That was Philip.
Yes.
Okay. Were there other indigenous tribes in the U.S. that made codes that were used in World War II?
Yes, but not in code. They used their language in the European theater. We know of at least 7 Hopi Indians that used their language.
Okay.
And in communications in the European theater, and several other tribes as well. There's a book written about that. I don't have it on my book list here.
Okay. And you also mentioned the indigenous code talkers in World War I.
Yes.
Do you know which tribes were doing that in World War I?
Well, Choctaw, I know for sure, and there might have been 1 or 2 others.
Okay.
Yeah, but they did not use code. They just used their language.
So they just spoke their language, but it wasn't in a code.
No,
per se.
it was
All
not
right.
in a code.
Okay. Super. Thank you. I'm gonna get in here and grab this machine and
Yeah, let me get one more picture in here.
all right. Thank you.
These are photo credits.
What I'd like to do now is if anyone has, I'm gonna scoot you out, Jerry.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna scoot you out just a minute here so I can get on the machine. I'm gonna stop your share.
Oh, by the way, this guy whose last name is Snow, Milton Snow,
Okay.
I don't know if he's related to me or not, but he was a photographer in the 30s and 40s on the Navajo reservation, a white guy.
Okay, super. If you have questions for Jerry, please unmute yourself and jump in, or put your question in the chat. You can type that in here in Zoom. Any questions for Jerry?
I can't see me. Do I need to see me? On the left.
Let's just see if there's any questions.
Yeah.
You'll have to unmute yourself.
Any questions?
Let's see. You know what? I am going to try.
Don't hear anybody.
Alt unmute. Sue Ross notes, Jerry, as always, very thorough.
Hey, this isn't a question, but when you were showing the Navajo, or we could hear the Navajo G.I. Joe, but
Yes.
we couldn't see him. You had up on the screen the list of books.
Oh yeah. Well, let me try that again.
You know what? What's happening here is it's our screen share in the back that is causing a trouble here. Jerry, let's have you scoot off to the right. Just go ahead and get in your chair and scoot right out of there.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Off to the right. Keep going. Keep
I'm
moving
out.
off to your right. Can you see that G.I. Joe guy there?
Yeah.
He's got a little backpack on.
That's a
That's
radio.
a radio set. And in his right hand, he's got a little microphone. There. And he's wearing boots, of course. And there you go. And when you raise his arm,
request artillery support.
that's how that works.
Oh, one more thing. Can you hear me?
Can I make
Yeah.
a suggestion? Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, I lived on the Navajo reservation for 18 years.
Yeah.
2 years in Kayenta 16 in Tuba City, so I knew Danny Key and some of the other code talkers, Peter McDonald,
Yeah.
although he has some baggage. But they used to joke about it. I said, you guys didn't need a code. You could have just spoke the language. It would baffle me. I've been around the world. I've learned a little Mandarin, and and Myanmar. I learned some language there, but and Arabic in Africa. But I could never get any more than a few words of Navajo. And they didn't need a code. They could have just spoken directly.
Yeah, it's possible, except that there was a guy, Kiyomi. What was his first name? I can't remember. He was not a code talker, but he was in the Philippines and was captured when the Japanese took the island, Philippines there. And they pulled him out and accused him of being a traitor. They thought he was Japanese. And he finally convinced them that he was a Native American and Navajo. And so they had him listen to communications that were being Navajos were doing in code. Of course, he was out there in the Pacific and captured by the Japanese. And he says, well, I don't know what they're saying. They're talking about what they had for breakfast. Potatoes were grenades and eggs were bombs. So, and they finally took him to Japan, to the headquarters of the, what do you call it? Communications and intelligence. And they tortured him mercifully. He was, after the war, when he was finally released, he was in the Veterans Hospital for about 4 years before he went home. But yeah, so he could not understand. Of course, if they were just speaking in their language, he would understand what they were communicating.
It's an Athabascan language. When I spent 7 years in Alaska, and there's a group up there called the Athabascans. They're in the interior.
Right.
And I was floored. A woman that used to work for me in Tuba City, her mother was one of the great weavers of the 20th century, Daisy Togglechi.
Yeah.
And she went up there to Alaska because her son was up there on the pipeline, and she bumped into a woman, an Athabascan from the interior of Alaska.
Yeah. And
they conversed just fine.
Yes.
So 400 or 500 years of separation of the languages, and they were still there could not have been much drift.
Right.
Because they could understand each other very well. And some of the Navajos kept on going, and there's a group down in Mexico.
Yeah, there's a question here. How many code talkers served during World War II? There were over 400 who were trained. The last class did not see combat because the surrender had taken place. Any other questions? Yes, interesting. Some of you might know the Navajo flute player, Carlos Nakai. He was invited to go to the Calvary Stampede and do a concert with his Native American flute. Afterwards, he saw in the program that there were these guys from Western Canada that were going to do drumming and dancing. So he went to their program, and then he discovered he could talk to them afterwards in his language, which was a big surprise for him.
Well, you were right, though. In the First World War, I think there may have been Cherokee was one of those groups in Oklahoma that where they used their language.
Yes.
And that's where that may have come from. But no, just in terms of indigenous languages, of course the Eskimos had Yupik, and I learned a few words of that and everything. But the Navajo language, the technicians would all interpret it for us. They would try to teach me a word. I mean, we're not talking a phrase; we're talking about a word. Like sit down or hello or thing, and it baffled me.
Yeah.
But as you might remember, there was a very not so good movie called Wind Talkers about 20 years ago.
Right.
That talked about the code talkers, and Nicolas Cage, I think, was the star.
Yes.
And I can remember when the movie came to Harkins in Flagstaff, I can remember driving by. This is when they were at the old location.
Yeah.
And there must have been 10,000 pickups there.
Yeah.
All the Navajos had gone down to watch the movie.
Yeah, I was there too. And that's when I first met Paul Blatchford.
Oh, okay.
And then later he came to one of my talks, and we interviewed him afterwards. He told us some amazing stories.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Very, very well done.
Yeah, here's another question. Have you been to the museum near Normandy? I have not.
I have.
Yeah,
Okay, okay, where am I?
No, I've been there. It's very moving.
yeah.
Yeah, they have a whole section in regards to the code talkers there.
Oh, really?
And then there's also an exhibition here just down the street from me near the Los Angeles airport. And there's a restaurant that has all these planes and things. And
Uh-huh.
it's now turned into other things, but there's an exhibition there with the code talkers.
Very good. Very
So
good.
I appreciate your presentation.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing. You know, I told you that Carl Gorman, when he got his high school diploma in farming, he tore it up, threw it on the ground, swore he'd never go back to school again. And but guess what? After the war, he was hired by the University of California, Davis, to help to establish a Native American studies program. So he taught for a couple years at the University of California. Pretty amazing.
Well, you know, there's one more comment here. I just want to mention that Randy Rohr noted that the National Cryptological Museum at Fort Meade, Maryland, has a pretty good exhibit on the Navajo code talkers.
Yeah, good for them.
And with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for coming out tonight to the Grand Canyon Historical Society virtual outing. I hope you all are members. That would be great. And we will see you same time, same place next month when Nancy Malidi Meekum speaks about the Quaternary Grand Canyon. So thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And that will conclude tonight's virtual outing. You all have a very, very good evening and good night.
Thank you.